Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the craziness that happened in Nashville this past weekend with Vanderbilt pulling off an upset that frankly is a program-defining upset, a coach-defining upset with Clark Lee. Incredible performance and huge amount of respect for all of pretty much everyone over there, but especially the coaching staff that put together a great game plan, especially offensively. But let's get into the other craziness, because there were plenty of upsets around the country. It was not just confined to Nashville, Tennessee. There were a ton of things to talk about, and we'll start with that game over there in Fayetteville, Arkansas, because this one was weird. It was not even a game where it felt like Arkansas checked all of the boxes that you need to check to get an upset. They just came out on top. They played the game that they needed to play down the stretch, and this was really cool as well. It was another program, not quite the level of Vandy, of course, but at the end of the day, a program that hasn't had a lot of these moments in the past 5 years, and this one was special. There's no two ways about that. If you're watching Trey Biddy's walk and talk after this game, it was special. It was really cool to watch. It was all those fans getting involved, him just being as happy as I've seen him in quite some time. It was very cool to watch. And over more than anything, Sam Pittman deserves a ton of respect. This team did not start the season the way that they wanted to. They lost a game to Oklahoma State that they probably shouldn't have lost, but then they find a way to bounce back. It was a game that they very easily could have just rolled over, had this season go to 3-3, not be a great team going forward, and be kind of an afterthought in the SEC. They went out and really just played as physical as you possibly could have. Their offensive line did a great job against this Tennessee defensive line that is an absolute nightmare to deal with, and they did an incredible job utilizing this atmosphere. I don't think Josh Heupel was fully ready for this. I don't think he had the greatest game plan in the world, kind of had a weird, just clunky game plan offensively. Didn't feel like he had much of a rhythm of what he wanted to do, and Arkansas took advantage of it. They made just enough plays. Their defense was absolutely incredible. Nico Iamaleava took a little bit of a step back. I don't know if it changes who he is in the long run, but maybe this year he's not quite the player that we expected him to be. But more than anything, how Arkansas won this was just letting the kids take over. It was absolutely insane to see what Malachi Singleton and what Braylon Russell did late in this game, because both those kids are freshmen. It's absolutely insane what we're seeing from a lot of these freshmen around the country, but especially those two on Saturday. So much was asked of them down the stretch. They had a play in every single yard of the final drive to win that game. They were absolutely incredible. Braylon Russell runs like a bowling ball. He's absolutely so much fun to watch, but this Arkansas team just said, okay, the kids can have it. We'll trust them to make the right plays, and they did. It was absolutely incredible to watch. They didn't just run the ball down their throat. They made a number of plays that they needed to make down the stretch of that game, and Malachi Singleton responded to a really tough moment incredibly well. And then taking the punch. This happened across the country, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, but it's absolutely remarkable what Arkansas was able to do. They controlled the first half pretty comfortably, but only led by 3. Excuse me. And then Tennessee comes out in the second half, it scores 2 quick touchdowns, goes up 14-3, and you think, okay, this game's pretty much over. You kind of wrap it up, and Arkansas responds with 16 straight points. It was absolutely incredible to watch, and it's one of those things that you can't really quantify in college football, but the teams that have it, and the teams that don't just don't at all, and Arkansas absolutely had it on Saturday. And then you got long drives. This is pretty much the only way you're going to beat Tennessee, and especially the only way you're going to hold them to 14 points, is keep that offense on the sideline. They had drives of 10 plays, 8 plays, 9 plays, 13 plays, 7 plays, and 16 plays. They did exactly what you want to do. If you're playing Tennessee, especially at home, get the crowd involved, keep that offense on the sideline, and get a win like this one. A little bit ugly at times, but you get out with a win and become a really interesting team going forward. I think for Tennessee, this one doesn't hit me quite as hard as the Bama one. I do think they have a couple of things they have to figure out, including you got to get more from Nico Iamaleava in these big-time moments. But at the end of the day, I do think it doesn't much change what Tennessee's goal is this year. It doesn't much change what they can do this year. It does change how difficult it's going to be to get there. And they do have to play Alabama. They do have to play Georgia. So not necessarily going to get easier by any means, but you dust yourself off, you pick yourself up, you dust yourself off, you'll be more than fine. And then for Arkansas, I think Sam Pittman just saved his job. Frankly, he probably might have the rest of the season, but this is a huge win. This is one of those wins that fans will totally forget the rest of the season. Now, they do have a bye week, and then they have LSU, so it's not necessarily going to get easier for the Razorbacks. I think they're still a team that's probably going to find themselves in the middle of the SEC, but really fun team. One of those teams that, again, is probably going to get the best shot of pretty much every SEC team going forward. Then we had the title rematch over there in Seattle, and Washington got a big-time win, 27-17 over Michigan. This one was a little bit less surprising because we saw that Washington was the favorite going into this one, so not necessarily an upset, or depending how you define an upset, but at the end of the day, Washington was able to attack this back end. And that's an absolute problem. The Michigan defense is very good. I don't have any doubts in that. I think the defensive line is elite. I think they have every ability to be a really, really good football team and pretty much stifle any offense they go up against. They're getting attacked in the back end way too aggressively. And frankly, Will Johnson is the only guy on that back end that outright scares people at this point, which is a huge problem. So they're going to have to figure that out going forward. They did make a switch at quarterback to Jack Tuttle. They're pretty much the same with him at quarterback. They're a little bit more dangerous, so he will likely be the quarterback going forward, but doesn't necessarily change what this team is. If your wide receivers can't get open, then you can't really do much offensively. Incredible job by Steve Belichick and this defensive staff just adjusting to the craziness that was Michigan's offense in this one. Obviously, started with that very aggressive rushing attack. You bring in Jack Tuttle, you got to deal with some other things, but Washington adjusted really, really well and got, an incredible performance in the back end of this game from their defense. And then how Washington was able to win. I think Will Rogers' veteran presence played a huge factor in this game because there is a reality where they're starting they're starting another player. They're starting a younger player at that position, and he just comes up a little bit flat. They're playing a weak Wink Martindale offense or defense. It's not easy to deal with. They just come out a little bit flat. That's not not remotely what happened with Will Rogers. He looked as comfortable as you possibly could look against this Michigan defense. He was really, really precise, made pretty much every throw you could possibly ask him to, otherwise, except for that pick, but he was really, really incredible. Did everything you could have possibly wanted and led them to a win that would have been very easy to lose track of at some point during this day. And then the other part of this is Michigan being Michigan. You know exactly what they're going to do. There's no change. Jack Tuttle adds a little bit of throwing ability. There's no two ways about that, but they're going to run the ball. That's who they are. They're going to try to run the ball and then maybe hit a pass every now and then, but their wide receivers aren't going to get separated, so they're going to have to be pretty sketchy passes. But at the end of the day, once you get a beat on this offense, you should be able to stop it, especially when you have the running back or the linebackers that Washington has. They did a really, really good job at the end of this game, and that's the other part of this. Finishing was a huge part of this game for Washington. They outscored Michigan 13-0 in the fourth quarter. The possessions went Washington field goal, Michigan punt, or 3-and-out, I believe, Washington INT, Michigan fumble, Washington touchdown, Michigan INT, Washington field goal. They did everything that they possibly could have wanted, and even when they made that mistake, they got the ball right back. So really impressive performance from Washington, one that they very badly needed as they move forward, and frankly, I think they want that Rutgers game back a little bit right now, but at the end of the day, I think when you look forward for Michigan, not much has changed, and I don't know if much can really change right now because the reality is you have what you have on this team. You don't necessarily have elite wide receivers anywhere. You don't have a quarterback that is going to make you scary offensively. I think Jack Tuttle makes them better, but at the end of the day, I don't really know how much better. I don't know how many wins they're going to finish with. I think there are a number of teams that have the ability to do what Washington did in this game, and 7, 8, I think would be okay for this team because you have Oregon, you have Ohio State coming up. Those are two I can pretty confidently say are going to be losses, and then you got to figure out where you go from there. But it's going to be a rough season, at least to the finish of this season for Michigan, and then you got to figure out where you are in the offseason and hopefully change course just a little bit. And then for Washington, as I said, they want the Rutgers game back very badly, but at the end of the day, I think they're a really tough team. I don't know if it changes too much about what they're going to be in the Big Ten going forward, but they do have a tough road test against Iowa, Indiana, USC, Penn State, UCLA, a little bit of a break there, and then Oregon the rest of the way. So not necessarily going to get easier for Washington. They are a really fun team and one of those teams that could cause problems for pretty much anyone up top. So that Oregon game is really interesting at the end of the year. Penn State is fascinating. So we'll definitely break this team down going forward, but huge win for them nonetheless and get a little bit of revenge for that national title game. Totally different teams, obviously, but when you see that logo, you'd like to get a little bit of revenge. And then finally, we had USC fall on the road to Minnesota. This was just Minnesota playing Big Ten football and USC not having an answer. Pretty plain and simple, honestly. It was one of those games that Minnesota just had every single answer to what USC is. And frankly, kind of like Michigan is Michigan, USC is USC, just for totally different reasons. They are not a team that's going to go on the road against Big Ten teams and play really tough Big Ten teams that can run the ball and play very well. That's just the reality of where they are right now. They're just not big enough. There's a number of things that can be fixed with this defense, and frankly, I think D'Anton Lynn's done about as good of a job as you could possibly hope from that defensive coordinator sometimes you're just not big enough. And right now, USC is just not big enough. That's the reality of football at certain points. You got to have guys that are over 300 pounds. I believe they only have one on their defensive line. You got to have more than that. That's just the reality of this situation, especially when you play in the Big Ten. So a tough loss for them, definitely puts them in a weird spot going forward, but you got a big one against Penn State. Maybe everything bounces back in that game. But then I think Minnesota just kept doing exactly what they wanted to do. They never really changed who they were. They never really changed, their approach with USC, and never really had to be totally fair. But absolutely one of those things that can be overlooked in a game like this. But when you play a team like USC, it's very easy to get outside yourself, and Minnesota just didn't let that happen in this one. And how Minnesota won, I think you can't let USC out of sight. That's just kind of the reality of playing an offense that is that dangerous. You absolutely have to make sure that they're within 7 points, within 10 points. Just keep them in reach, and then possibly make the plays down the stretch. That's exactly what Michigan did. That's what Minnesota did. And frankly, I thought the refs were going to kind of hurt them at the very end, but they made the right call. We move on with our day. And then you forced Miller Moss to make mistakes, which is not a very common thing. He threw 2 INTs in this game, only completed 23 of his 38 passes. Justin Whaley was an absolute monster on that back end. I believe they had 8 pass breakups as an entire team. He had half of them. He was absolutely incredible on that back end and is one of those guys that could cause problems for any quarterback in the entire country. And then it was Big Ten football. There's no two ways about that. Minnesota ran the ball 40 times and threw it 19. They did exactly what they wanted to do in this game. Max Brosmer made no mistakes, didn't do anything overly special, but no INTs, no touchdowns, completing 15 of 19 passes. That's plenty good enough. There's no two ways about that. And then they ran the ball and just waited for this USC defense to quit, and that's exactly what happened. A huge win for them. Darius Taylor's an absolute monster for that team and definitely will be someone to watch going forward. But where do they go from here? I think USC, it's just your job to battle going forward. I know this is very upsetting. I know it's one of those seasons that you felt like the defense was going to make huge strides and you were going to be a dangerous team in the Big Ten. The reality is you're just not there yet. You have a coach that's in his 3rd year. He just hired entirely new staff. He's pretty much in his 1st year. As upsetting as that sounds, he's pretty much in his 1st year right now, so you're just going to have to wait it out. You're going to have to get bigger guys on that team this coming year and see what happens. But at the end of the day, definitely a really tough loss. Puts them in a weird place going into that Penn State game. And then for Minnesota, a bowl game is very realistic. Frankly, I think they can get to 7-8 wins if they can play their cards right. But a win over UCLA, Maryland, and Wisconsin, 3 games that they hypothetically should win, will absolutely get them there. And then you got Illinois, you got Rutgers, you got Penn State. They could beat all of those teams. Now, I would probably pick against them, but we'll get there when we get there. It's going to be really interesting to watch this team unfold, and frankly, if another team comes in that's not quite as physical as you want them to be, could be the exact same fate that USC felt. But it's going to be an incredible thing to watch all of these teams unfold. Some of them will fade into oblivion, and this will be the big prime moment in their season. Some will continue on and be a very dangerous team going forward. But let's take our second break here, and when we come back, we got to talk about what should have been the biggest news of the week, which is A&M dominating Missouri and moving forward. And then we got a Miami game that's making a lot of people angry. So I'll break it all down right after this, so stick with us.